is an Associate Director of Pragmatic Display, and she comes with strong experience on several direct response and brand campaigns with various partners and pragmatic platforms. Amber started her advertising career on the publisher side, then later transitioned to agency managing large budget clients display on social campaigns, and then currently she oversees a team helping guide strategy and find efficiencies to meet KPIs on campaigns. Welcome, Amber. And then next we have Mike Bionajovny. I hope I said that right. I don't think I did. But he's been with Teads for over 2 years, serving as Director of Creative Strategy on the Teads studio team. Prior to Teads, though, he's worked on the account team at 3 different creative agencies. And his focus has always been with digital experiences for clients such as Citi, Smirnoff, Barclays, TD, Ameritrade. He's worked on everything from 360 campaigns to educational programs built on machine learning, all centered on the intersection of creative data and technology. Welcome, Mike B. And then last but not least, we have Mike Villabolas. Mike brings more than a decade of digital marketing experience with a focus of growth marketing and data science. He's been with Teads for almost 2 years now and is responsible for the performance advertising division. However, prior to Teads, Mike, a founding member of a video DSP, focused on customer acquisition and attribution.
Hey there.
Alrighty.
Apologies for my camera, by the way. It's not complying with GoToWebinar.
No worries at all, it's fine. And then here's our agenda for today. So first we're just going to do a quick intro into Teads, and then why video is important in Q4, planning for digital devices and messaging, how to break through, incentivizing action, extend messaging, and then of course, last but not least, measurement throughout campaign. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to our 3 speakers.
Great. Appreciate the awesome intro. So for those who aren't familiar with Teads, Teads really is a global media platform that's connecting the world's top tier publishers and advertisers in touch space with about 1.2 billion people globally. Within the US, we're touching about 86% of the internet user audience. And I think one of the key things to note here is we actually were the inventors of the in-read unit. So if you look on the screen here, you can see in the heart of the editorial content, that really is what Teads is known for in our flagship product. We own and operate this ad slot within all tier 1 publishers to operate within both display and video capacities. And as I mentioned, we own and operate within all top tier 1 and local news sites, which really does help extend to any user that's out there, whether it be someone looking for some sort of like brand safe play, but also an economic play as well to make sure you're hitting the efficiency within your performance campaigns.
Cool, thanks, Mike. So before we dive into the tips for leveraging video into next quarter strategy, wanted to just start off with discussing the importance of incorporating video, particularly for Q4 of 2020. So as we all know, with the current global economic and health issues, this holiday season is going to look much different compared to last year across the world. But when focusing here at home within the US, there are several factors that will determine that consumer confidence. And the first one is really around the uncertainty of the economic relief. While there are efforts underway, there's still a ton of uncertainty on how soon that relief will really be felt by those that have been impacted. So it leaves a huge question mark in many consumers' minds. Another big factor is, of course, the unknown of COVID and how that impact of this pandemic is really going to look in Q4. Usually we see the annual flu season start to creep up. So a ton of speculation around how that colder season could affect that infection rate. And then finally, just overall November elections and how that ends up shaping the future. All 3 factors combined will really dominate and steer the overall consumer confidence when it comes to spending and willingness to spend for this holiday season. Now, when we take a look at how the pandemic has impacted overall consumer consumption behavior within video formats, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. For example, we've seen right when the pandemic started, to cause lockdowns. We saw a lot of companies such as Netflix. In Q2 alone, they reported over 15 million new subscribers, which is the most they've reportedly ever seen within a single quarter. So we're seeing that with less to do and the disruption in pre-COVID activities, consumers are not only looking for new platforms to consume media through, but also seeing that they're spending more time, particularly with digital video. And this year alone, it's projected that US adults will on average watch 2 hours of digital video per day, which is a 19-minute increase from last year. So brands and advertisers, I think the thing to keep in mind here should really be, let's start thinking about how we're going to take advantage of this increased exposure and that opportunity to reach more users as you plan for holidays.
Cool. So with that, we kind of wanted to give some tangible takeaways of how we can approach this season that has a lot of question marks, to say the least. And I think that starts with planning up front, right? And I know that we often think about planning from a media perspective, but how do we plan from a creative perspective for not only a season that's a little bit unknown, but also beyond, right? So often we think TV first, right? From the creative perspective, there's a million reasons why we think TV first. There's production budgets. There's a lot of eyeballs on the production that goes into TV. But we also know that doesn't always translate into mobile directly, right? Chances are you've probably lost a viewer before you get to that 30-second mark that TV spots are often kind of centered around, right? The build of a story leading up to a climactic moment isn't necessarily a format that works in mobile. And as we've already kind of mentioned, this holiday season is going to look a little bit different. E-commerce is always important, but I don't know if we can overstate how important it's going to be in Q4 of this year. And we as brands need to show up where people are going to be, right? So we really need to think about these mediums and these devices in accordance with how the user thinks about them and how the user interacts with a brand on these devices. All that said, creativity shouldn't take a back seat, right? Instead of seeing all of these things as obstacles, let's see them as opportunities. And let's understand the capabilities that are at our disposal. And when we think about creative that can tell a story, it's not necessarily narration, right? It's not necessarily music, but how do we create something that is a very tangible interaction with the user, right? So just kind of a few things that you see on screen here as considerations from a creative standpoint. But let's, on the next slide, we can take a look at how that all kind of comes together. What do we mean by all of this? Well, let's think about the time, right? We don't have a ton of time, but we do have some time. Let's kind of work within that. The aspect ratio, we're not stuck to 16:9 as we are often in TV, right? Let's think about the different kinds of formats that we can play within that are comfortable on different devices. And let's think about the effects. How can we break the frame, kind of come through to the user in ways that you probably can't do on other mediums, right? So this is what we mean when we're talking about the capabilities that are afforded. And it takes a fair bit of planning to get here, right? It doesn't just come together necessarily. But when we think device first, when we think about what we want to convey as a brand, I think that this becomes a really powerful medium to reach our users in a unique way. So we now we've planned, right? But how do we break through? Well, we have to think about the context, right? I kind of already said this, but to stress it again, we have to think about how the ad, how our message shows up to the user before we actually build the creative itself. We have to think about the fact that most sound is off when a user's watching ads on mobile, right? So how do we kind of take what we've known forever about advertising and use that fact to our advantage, like you see kind of in this top example. Also, you lose a lot of impressions after 3 seconds. Now, this is interesting, right? Amber just mentioned how much time we spend watching Netflix, right? It's not that our attention spans are completely gone, but we've been trained that we don't have a long time to spend on one specific thing, right? There's a million other things at any moment that could be grabbing your attention, right? Right now, you could be doing a million other things rather than listening to me talk. But hopefully you're still listening to me talk. But so it's not about a lack of attention spans, but it's instead how do we think about the short time that we have with a user and give them something beneficial, give them something tangible, using that moment to deliver something that's impactful to them. That's where we start to capture and retain attention, right? Because again, it's not that we don't have the capacity as humans to pay attention for longer than 3 seconds, but that's what we end up doing because I could check my phone, I could check my social feed, I could check my email at any given time because it's all accessible to us. So we have to think about, and the example that you see on the bottom is how do we incorporate branding in a way that is actually kind of thumb stopping, right? We talk about thumb stopping all the time in mobile. How do we use that to our advantage so that the branding is the thing that's actually drawing the users in? And then it's on us to make sure that we're delivering that right message to the right user, right? And that's, I think, where data and creative really come together to inform that type of strategy. And then tip 3, right? So we've talked about planning, we've talked about the context. So now let's think about the KPIs, right? We know that creative can't live in a vacuum. It's important to plan creative alongside planning media, right? Because it's really about the intersection of media, creative, technology, data. How does data kind of play a role, right? So thinking about the full funnel, especially during this time, is really important, right? Of course, we want the action. Of course, we want to drive those sales during kind of the most critical time of year. But how do we introduce ourselves as a brand? I keep kind of speaking from the brand's perspective, but how do we introduce ourselves in a way that says, hi, I am this and I stand for this before I say, come buy something from me. So it's about kind of the use of not only the formats and the way that a format shows up to a user, but those different kind of sequences of messages so that we can kind of bring the impact at the awareness level. We can change a perception at the consideration level, and we can give the user something to do or something to take away as we get down into action. Like we said, it's going to look a little bit different this year, but I think those principles still very much apply. And I know Mike wanted to hit more. Other Mike wanted to hit a little bit more on this.
Two mics. Yeah, I think you brought up a good point of incentivizing the action within the full funnel strategy, but also the creative. You want to make sure that you are incentivizing some sort of call to action so the user understands what they're clicking through. But even before then, it's really important to understand the full funnel approach. And I fully understand that that's kind of an overused example, but the funnel for us is more of an ebb and flow because nothing is as linear as you start at the top and you go to the bottom. It's at what point did you catch that user's attention? Do you understand a proxy metric that led up to the actual conversion? Because on average, it takes a user 6 times to visit a website before they convert. So you'll see an increase in page depth as a user comes through because they're exploring different product pages. And those product pages are typically incentivized with the creative. So they go hand in hand when you're exploring how to actually get a user to convert. And as Mike mentioned, it doesn't all live in a vacuum, which is why we're going to discuss on the next tip or portion. It's going to be how to extend beyond the formats. So really understanding attention at its simplest form. So if you look here, video is known for being extremely engaging. Obviously, you have visual and audible components that are attached to it. But what do you do once the video is fully complete? On average, we typically see advertisers on the brand level hold a frequency cap of about 1 to 2 impressions per month. So that means that if you don't complete an impression or a 30-second video within those 1 to 2, what do you do next, right? And what I like to incentivize, or what I like to explain to advertisers or partners is, if someone watches a 30-second video for 15 seconds, they were clearly very leaned in, especially if they're between a reader reading an article and they're looking and they turn sound on, or maybe they complete the entire video. One of the beautiful parts of that point is they might as well have just gone to the website, because now you can actually continue the conversation and allow that sequential message to really kick in. Because as I mentioned, ebbing and flowing, they watched 30 seconds, they clearly showed interest, but they're just more interested at the time in the article. So you follow up with maybe a quick bump of a display ad saying, hey, like, we engaged with you at X point because maybe they saw some sort of like diamond based because it's a jeweler, or a product from Chloe, whatever it may be. They're clearly enticed enough to watch the content, to follow up with a display ad to be more economical to hit your full funnel or lower funnel economic goals. And continuing the conversation, I can't stress enough, is very important to leverage across multiple different avenues. So display is the most economical, but make sure that you're also very aware of kind of the brand safety of where you're being placed. Because right now, long tail effects or long tail inventory can have long tail effects, being that we are going into some choppy water with it being an election year, with COVID being out, and a lot of large events happening within the world. So we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail in a couple more slides, but want to plant the seed of being brand safe while also having the full attention of the user is extremely important, while maintaining the economics of low CPMs and the proxy metrics that lead up to an actual conversion are fundamentally important to any Q4 plan. So tip 5, keep a pulse on measurement along the way. So this is going to be extremely important because there are quite a few different points where a user can drop off. And one of the things that we noticed within the Teads platform is we saw that mobile usage has gone up by about 27%, which is extremely good because people are consuming more content. Being that we are in the heart of the editorial content, people are reading a lot more news, especially. But what we've noticed is between a mobile click and a full page load can be between 30 and 50% drop off, as high as 50%. And that can be a tough click to swallow because unfortunately, if they click and don't load, then it's wasted media at that point. So we want to make sure that we're looking at what's the click to actual load ratio, and the load ratio to a second page ratio as well, and evaluating our bounce rate. Another big challenge that we're noticing is quality traffic. As I mentioned, this is going to be coming from the page depth and also interest and intent within the website. So how are you mitigating against that? And then the last challenge, as we all are well aware of this, the average marketer has between 9 and 14 channels, all within digital, not including out of home. And this can be tough because you have a lot of overlapping channels. So understanding how to mitigate against overlap is going to be fundamentally important because while CPMs do go up in Q4, you want to make sure that you're spending as efficiently as possible across the board. And I alluded to this earlier, but maintaining brand safety and measure where possible. I'm going to call it the 3 biggest challenges is lack of standard measurement. So to address this, we strongly encourage using third parties such as IES, Double Verify, or even Moat for viewability and just overall fraudulent evaluation. Second is managing deduplicated audiences. This can be done in a programmatic fashion, or you can also do this with certain technologies on the vendor side. And then the third biggest one is going to be managing frequency cap. So understanding what is going to be lumped into, say, prospecting versus retargeting. All of these are fundamental to Q4, especially as we start investing more into search, social, and kind of our ancillary channels as well. Next slide, please. And a few pillars that we have actually leveraged with partners in the past. So Teads actually has our own brand pool study, which allows for 2 to 3 questions that can be standardized and also custom. And this really helps evaluate aided brand awareness, online ad awareness, message association, brand favorability, consideration, or even purchase intent. All of this is done within that questionnaire. We have an entire research team to hold you through that process. And then alternatively, you can look at Kantar for kind of long or short form 20-question surveys that really help with brand sentiment, brand attributes, opportunities within the market or audiences, barriers to entry, category for consumers, non-consumers, and also a halo effect. So if someone buys, that actually affects them purchasing on the road for maybe some accessory purchases as well. And then Nielsen as well. Last but not least, they measure kind of the effect of the campaign generally to look at both ROAS and incremental lift, kind of purchase and buying intent within your target market. So brand buyers, competitors, lapsed buyers, and also categorical breakouts as well. So I think a key takeaway here within this tip is you actually can't measure what you don't track. So make sure you're always tracking and using a third party, whether it be within a partner environment or a third party environment. But you want to make sure that we're really enriching the data, because the data does only lend itself to a better creative, and it becomes more of a circle that's getting off each other. So with that in mind, again, track and measure so you can always get better. You're off the spot too. So let's speak a little further. If you have any questions about Teads and how we can help with your creative, or how we can help within your lower funnel initiative, please feel free to reach out to sales-us-atlanta@teads.com, and we will have one of our local representatives reach out to you so we can have a discussion, and we'll be sure to give you some added value support within the campaign as well at a 15% marker.
Awesome. Thank you to our three speakers. We're going to go ahead and dive straight into our Q&A, but just wanted to launch this quick poll for Tenuity's offer. So if you found this information insightful from the Tenuity and Teads team on maintaining brand safety measures when possible, and how to really just advance your Q4 strategy as it pertains to display, go ahead and just let us know. Otherwise, I do have some questions in the queue. So first question that I have is, what have you seen in terms of indicators for how this holiday season will differ from previous ones?
I can jump in there. So what we've kind of seen from not only research, but also sort of trends with what we've been kind of tracking. People are certainly concerned with finances. I think that's still, that remains top of mind, and probably will have an impact. I heard in the last session that sort of like the treat yourself mentality will still exist, and we're kind of seeing the same thing. I think that it'll be really important, but I think that people are going to look for deals along the way, right? The holiday shopping kind of lists might start a little bit earlier. The Black Friday season might extend a little bit beyond a couple of days as it's normally been. And also just in general, like I think the spirit is going to be a little bit different with sort of families being separated and everything else going on right now. So I think from a creative standpoint, which is kind of how I approach everything, authenticity and being empathetic, I think, are more important than ever, right? I think, of course, there's still a time for fun and sort of lightheartedness. I think there's also a role this year for kind of standing on the side of the consumer from a messaging standpoint. So that's kind of what we've seen on our side.
Thanks, Mike. This next question that I have here is, what's more effective for paid video ads on social, user-generated content or professional content made by the brand?
You want to take that, Mike? It's more creative.
Sure. I think that there's a time and a place for both, right? So I think, if I'm understanding the question, it's more co-branded content versus content made from the brand. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So there's a time and a place for both. Co-branded content certainly serves from an equity standpoint, right? You as a brand partnering with a publisher, with whomever, you take on the equity that they bring, right? So good and bad. There's positives and negatives to that. But choosing a partner carefully and being really thoughtful in the content that they are creating has a role in a lot of campaigns and can be really effective. That said, I think that, to my previous point, I think that there's definitely going to be a role for authenticity this year in particular, and hearing that coming from the brand directly, I think is something that's going to be really powerful. I think the brands that are quiet will lose out long term. Those that stand for something, I think, have a lot to gain. And not that we're gaining from a bad situation, but really, again, that we're standing on the side of the audience, our consumers, our users, and and giving a voice to what they're saying, right? So it's more of a conversation, not a one-way street.
And to kind of go off that question, Mike, can you give an example of authenticity as you've seen in this sense?
Sure. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just gonna say, like, one of the things that I've seen is Johnson & Johnson do a really good job of applying their authentic kind of lens on the approach to connecting with users or people by kind of illustrating how they've helped people on a day-to-day basis and not just like pushing products. They're discussing, okay, great, like SC Johnson is doing X, Y, and Z within the Chicago community, within the LA community, and really applying that at a pretty local level, and not discussing what their latest like Purell spinoff is, right? They're trying to help people and treating people as people and not just as consumers. And to me, I think that's a really good way to cut through the noise to be an authentic brand, and liaise into being a household name.
Thank you both, Mikes. The next question that we have here is, what are the cost ranges for the brand measurement tracking that you were mentioning earlier in the presentation?
Those vary. So for us internally at Teads, it's typically an added value component with a certain threshold being met. Then you can expect Nielsen to be in the 10 to 15K range. And Millward Brown, I don't want to speak out of turn because I don't know what their updated rates are, but you can expect the Nielsen benchmark.
Thank you, Mike V. Next question that we have here is, what are the cost ranges? Actually, sorry, I just asked that one. What trends have you seen with your publisher partners because of COVID-19?
Yeah, and Mike V, feel free to chime in after I give my response, but I think we've seen a lot of home improvement and home decor become much more of the consumable content. People making banana bread or some sort of home-cooked meal. I'm definitely guilty of the banana bread hype. And then also a lot of web services and personal care. Personal care, I mean, this is a tough conversation to have, I think, individually, but personal care around like mental health. A lot of blogs on how to approach or tackle certain issues at home have been a lot of really big on readership. So with that in mind, with folks reading that and anybody advertising in the open web, Mike B mentioned this earlier, but be empathetic to the situation. It's not all about pushing products. It's sometimes about connecting with the consumer, and where you're connecting with them. So if you're on a blog that may be adjacent to that, be aware. And then that's also going back to monitoring where you're advertising, so you can be brand safe, but also consumer safe.
The only other thing I have to add to that, that was, that's definitely what we're seeing. Travel is on its way back. I think people are dipping their toes into thinking about the next kind of big vacation, though potentially not ready to pull the trigger yet. We're still seeing that as a trend from an interest standpoint. So we'll see how that kind of tracks along.
The next question that I have here states, what do you suggest are the best ways to maximize display on desktop for acquisition, especially as we build up to Q4?
I would look at scoring. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
I'll go after you, Amber. Call you.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think even thinking outside of video formats, when you think of lower funnel or, the most efficient display tactics for, driving that most cost effective CPA or ROAS, typically we see, where the most personalized messaging comes into play. So whether that's DCO or incorporating some sort of personalization even within video. I think, even the Teads team can probably speak to some of their more shoppable formats that they offer. So Mike, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about those formats particularly.
I think the one thing I would add beyond the formats is understanding your website flow and kind of the conversion path to that. So, and then from there, retargeting appropriately. So for me, I think it's understanding the conversion path before applying a format. And that's just what I've seen work within like our acquisition funnels.
Thank you both. And then just a couple more questions. I know we have a little bit of time before our next session. Amber, this is actually directed to you specifically. Do you think that the customer sentiment will cause more brands to have to fight for inventory? And do you think that weighing towards video over static will help offset this?
I don't think the customer sentiment will really impact, you know, the inventory itself. I think it's more going back to Mike's, I think it was tip 4, tip 5 on ensuring the brand safe environment, and that you have settings in place that are up to your brand standards. Really just making sure that you're on the cleanest inventory, especially I think given just the state of things currently, at least within, you know, at home with Q4 and elections and everything else going on in the world. And then the second part of your question was more around video and display. Is that right, Persephone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how that plays into just the inventory and overall sentiment. I think, you know, people are still going to be connected. No one's really going to travel a whole lot, even if it's kind of in the back of their mind. And so I think the consumption patterns, kind of what we shared in the beginning, will still hold true, and we'll probably see that continue to trend upwards. So kind of focusing on best of both worlds, you know, what sort of mix makes the most sense for your brand.
Gotcha. Thank you, Amber. And that's about it. I don't see any more questions coming into the queue. So that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for our third session of the day. We have about 10 minutes before our next session starts, so we'll just go ahead and take a quick break so we can start on time. But I did just want to go ahead and leave everyone with these key takeaways. So plan for each device during the pre-production would be the first tip. Of course, number 2, think about how the user will see the ad when you're building your creative. Third tip, use a full funnel approach, and establish KPIs at each layer. And then fourth, don't silo your strategy around formats. And then fifth, you can't measure what you don't track. So making sure that your attribution is all tight. But we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, everybody.